A ruthless Lycan King, feared across the medieval realms, stopped dead in his tracks. A dirt-smudged 7-year-old girl blocked his massive warhorse, pointing a tiny trembling finger at his scarred face. "You're coming with me," she demanded. "I need a father." The monster didn't growl. He froze entirely. The autumn rain in the northern territory of Oakhaven did not merely fall. It punished the earth. It turned the unpaved roads of Ashbourne into deep, treacherous rivers of mud and washed away the meager crops the peasants had broken their backs to cultivate. Yet on this particular afternoon, the villagers did not care about the rain or the ruined harvest. They cared only about staying out of sight, hiding behind bolted wooden doors and shuttered windows, peering through the cracks with wide, terrified eyes. Caelan Harlaw was riding through their village, known across the continent as the Lycan King. Caelan was a man carved from brutality and legend. Rumors of his existence were used to frighten disobedient children in the southern kingdoms, while men of war whispered his name over hushed tavern tables. He was the sovereign of the northern reaches, a cursed monarch who commanded a bloodline of shapeshifters. Underneath his heavy black iron armor beat the heart of an apex predator. He rode a monstrous destrier that stood hands taller than any standard cavalry horse, its hooves churning the mud with rhythmic heavy thuds. Flanking him were his lieutenants, heavily armed men whose eyes glowed with an unnatural amber hue, even in the dim, storm-clouded daylight. Caelan's expression was an unreadable mask of hardened leather and old scars. He was returning from a border skirmish near the Riverlands, his armor still coated in the dried, rust-colored evidence of a brief and violent victory. The world knew him as a merciless warlord, a creature devoid of human empathy, solely driven by the instinct to protect his pack and obliterate his enemies. He did not ask for love. He demanded submission. As the vanguard approached the center of the village square, Caelan's horse suddenly tossed its massive head, letting out a sharp snort. Caelan pulled back on the heavy leather reins, bringing the beast to a halt. His men immediately stopped behind him, hands drifting instinctively to the pommels of their broadswords. Standing in the absolute center of the muddy thoroughfare, directly in the path of the most feared army in the realm, was a child. She could not have been older than 7. Her dress was little more than a burlap sack, tied with a frayed rope, soaked through with rain, and plastered to her thin frame. Her face was smudged with soot and dirt, but her eyes were a piercing, unmistakable shade of silver blue. She held no weapon. She did not cower. She stood with her tiny boots planted firmly in the muck, her chin tilted upward in an act of sheer, inexplicable defiance. Garrick Caelan, second-in-command, urged his horse forward. "Out of the way, little beggar." He grunted, not unkindly, but with the rough impatience of a soldier longing for a dry hearth. "Move before you are trampled." The girl did not blink. She did not look at Garrick. Her silver-blue eyes were locked entirely on Caelan. Slowly, deliberately, she raised a small, dirt-caked hand and pointed her index finger squarely at the Lycan King's chest. The silence in the square grew absolute, save for the patter of the rain. The hidden villagers held their breath, expecting the monstrous warlord to draw his blade and cleave the insolent child in two. "You're coming with me," the little girl said. Her voice was thin, raw from the cold, yet it carried an unnatural authority that defied her age and size. "I need a father." Garrick let out a bark of incredulous laughter, looking back at the men expecting them to share the dark humor of the situation. But no one laughed. Not a single soldier made a sound. Caelan Harlaw had stopped breathing. The Lycan King, a creature who had waded through oceans of enemy blood without a flinch, was utterly paralyzed. Beneath the heavy scent of wet earth, hoarse sweat and rusted iron, his enhanced senses caught something that struck him with the force of a battering ram. It was a scent, subtle hidden beneath layers of grime and rain, but undeniable to a wolf. It was the scent of crushed lavender parchment and summer rain. It was a scent he had not encountered in 8 agonizing, hollow years. Rosamond. Caelan's golden eyes widened, the pupils dilating, until they nearly swallowed his irises. He stared at the girl. Now, looking past the dirt and the ragged clothing, he saw it. The slope of her nose, the stubborn jut of her lower lip, and those eyes, silver blue, exactly like his own. The realization crashed over him, tearing down the formidable emotional fortress he had spent a decade building. With a loud clatter of armor, Caelan swung his massive frame off the warhorse. His boots sank deep into the mud as he took a slow, heavy step toward the child. Garrick tensed, unsure of what his king was doing. Caelan dropped to one knee, uncaring as the freezing mud soaked through his thick trousers. He was now eye level with the girl. Up close, she trembled. She was putting on a brave face, but she was terrified. Yet she didn't step back. "What is your name, little one?" Caelan asked. His voice, usually a deep, gravelly rumble that commanded armies, was barely more than a hoarse whisper. "Beatrice," she stated, her jaw set. "And my mother said, if I ever needed saving, I had to find the monster of the north. She said you owed her." Caelan's chest tightened, a phantom pain lancing through where his heart resided. The legend was true, the tragedy real. 8 years ago, Lady Rosamond of House Arryn, the only woman Caelan had ever loved, had been ripped from his arms. Forced into a political marriage by her family to secure an alliance with the Southern Lords, she had vanished from his life. He had believed she despised what he was. He had believed she chose safety over his cursed bloodline. "Your mother." Caelan choked on the words, a terrifying, predatory possessiveness flaring in his chest. "Where is Rosamond?" Beatrice's lower lip finally quivered, the brave facade cracking just a fraction. "She is locked in the dark. Lord William took her away. He said he is going to kill her. You have to come with me. You have to be my father now, and we have to kill him." The journey to Wintergale Keep was a blur of driving rain and thundering hooves. Caelan rode with Beatrice, situated firmly in front of him, on his massive saddle, wrapped securely in his heavier fur-lined cloak. The little girl, exhausted by her ordeal, and the freezing cold, had fallen asleep, leaning against the solid, iron-clad chest of the most dangerous man alive. Caelan rode with one hand lightly resting over her small back, fiercely protective his mind, a violently swirling maelstrom of rage, grief, and undeniable instinct. This was his pup, his flesh and blood. The scent was impossible to deny. The wolf inside him recognized her instantly, demanding he slaughter anyone who had ever caused her harm. But beneath the feral instinct was a deeper, more profound agony. Rosamond had not betrayed him. She had carried his child into the heart of enemy territory. She had suffered for 8 years, raising their daughter in secret, beneath the nose of her cruel husband, Lord William Trent. When the imposing, jagged stone spires of Wintergale Keep finally pierced the foggy horizon, Caelan felt the first twitch of a plan forming. The fortress was a brutalist monument to Lycan strength, built directly into the side of a sheer mountain. Torchlight flickered in the high windows, welcoming the king home. Once inside the great hall, Caelan bypassed his usual throne, instead carrying the sleeping Beatrice straight to the massive hearth, where a roaring fire fought back the damp chill. He shouted orders for his servants to bring warm water, fresh bread, and roasted meats. Garrick stood nearby, his heavy brow furrowed, watching his king fuss over a peasant child like a mother bear. My Lord Garrick finally ventured his voice, low. The men are confused. We delayed our march, brought a human child into the stronghold. Who is she? Calen didn't look up from the fire. He was gently unwrapping the wet cloak from Beatrice. She is not fully human, Garrick, and she is not a stranger. She is my heir. Garrick inhaled sharply, stepping back as if struck. Rosamond. He whispered, the realization dawning on him. Everyone in Calen's inner circle knew the name, though none dared speak it aloud. It was the wound that had turned their king into a ruthless tyrant. Beatrice stirred at the sound of the crackling fire and the smell of roasting venison. Her silver-blue eyes fluttered open. She blinked at the cavernous stone hall, the tapestries depicting great wolves, and finally at Calen, who was watching her with an intensity that would have made grown men weep. "Are you warm enough?" Calen asked, his voice softening to an unrecognizable timbre. Beatrice nodded, slowly pulling herself up to sit on the thick fur rug. A servant cautiously approached, setting a silver platter of meat and bread before her. She attacked the food with a ferocity that made Calen's chest ache. She had been starving. Once she had eaten her fill, Calen sat cross-legged on the stone floor across from her, ignoring the dirt and the dampness of his own clothes. "Beatrice, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Everything you can remember. Where is Lord William Trent keeping your mother?" Beatrice swallowed hard, wiping her mouth with the back of her sleeve. She reached into the neckline of her ruined dress and pulled out a tarnished silver chain. Dangling from it was a heavy pendant, heavily obscured by tarnish, but the emblem was unmistakable, a snarling wolf's head. The crest of House Harlaw. "She hid this in my mattress," Beatrice said, her voice steadying. "She told me that if the bad men ever came for her, I was to run to the woods, follow the river north, and show this to the monster. She said the monster was my real father." Calen reached out his large, calloused fingers, trembling slightly as he touched the pendant. He had given this to Rosamond the night before she was taken from him. "Why did the bad men come, Beatrice?" "Because of the Archbishop," she explained, her vocabulary, surprisingly advanced for a child, a testament to Rosamond's secret tutoring. "Archbishop Reginald came to our estate last moon. He brought men in white cloaks. They smelled like burning metal." Garrick cursed under his breath. "The silver vanguards, the church's inquisitors. They hunt our kind, Calen. They use silver-laced weaponry." Beatrice nodded vigorously. "Lord William knew. He always knew I was different. He used to hit my mother when I grew angry and broke things that shouldn't break. When the Archbishop arrived, Lord William told him that my mother was a traitor who lay with beasts. They wanted to kill me to make an example, but my mother found out." Tears finally welled in the little girl's eyes, her brave composure shattering. She locked me in the cellar near the drainage grate. She told me to squeeze through. I heard them break down the door. I heard Lord William laughing. He told the Archbishop not to kill her yet. He said they could use her to trap the Lycan King. He said if they kept her alive in the dungeons of High Cross, you would eventually come. The silence that followed her words was suffocating. The air in the great hall seemed to drop 20 degrees. Calen's eyes flared a brilliant, terrifying gold. The sound of his bones cracking echoed in the cavernous room as his hands gripped his own thighs, desperately suppressing the violent transformation that his rage demanded. He was not just angry. He was an explosive force of nature, barely contained in human flesh. William Trent had known. The man had lived with Kaelin's love, raised Kaelin's daughter, and abused them both in secret, biding his time to align with the Lycan's greatest religious enemy. They were using Rosamond as bait. Kaelin exhaled a long, shuddering breath, forcing his claws to retract from his fingertips. He looked at Beatrice, who was watching him with wide eyes, not with fear, but with an odd sense of awe. She recognized the monster within him, because a dormant piece of it lived within her. Garrick Kaelin said, his voice echoing with an unnatural, dual-toned resonance of man and beast. "Yes, my king. Summon the pack leaders. Call the banners from the eastern woods and the southern peaks. Tell them to arm themselves with iron and fire." Kaelin stood up, his massive frame casting a terrifying shadow against the stone walls. "We ride for Highcross at dawn. Lord Trent wanted a monster. I will give him a massacre." The dawn did not break over Wintergale Keep. It bled. A violent slash of crimson cut across the eastern horizon, illuminating an army that had gathered in unnatural silence. 3,000 Lycan warriors stood shoulder to shoulder in the freezing mist. There were no blaring trumpets, no chaotic clattering of armor, and no drunken boasts of impending victory. There was only the low, synchronized rumble of predatory breathing, and the terrifying gleam of amber eyes fixed upon their king. Kaelin Harlaw stood before them, clad not in his usual heavy plate, but in boiled leather and chainmail that would not restrict the inevitable transformation. He had spent the final hours of the night sitting by the hearth, watching Beatrice sleep under the watchful, fiercely maternal eye of Lady Rowena, the eldest matron of the pack. Leaving his daughter behind was a physical ache, a tearing sensation in his chest. But he knew she was safe within the mountain fortress. Now his mind was singularly focused on the woman who had sacrificed everything to keep their child alive. The march to the southern valleys. The journey to Highcross was brutally fast. Lycans did not march like human armies. They moved like a shadow across the landscape, crossing rivers and navigating dense forests with terrifying speed. By nightfall of the second day, the jagged, imposing silhouette of Highcross Cathedral and its surrounding fortress loomed over the valley. Highcross was the seat of Archbishop Reginald's power, a towering monument of white stone and stained glass, fortified by thick defensive walls. As Kaelin's vanguard breached the tree line, the heavy scent of burning wood and ozone assaulted his enhanced senses. "They know we are here," Garrick murmured, riding up beside Kaelin. "The wind carries the scent of forge fires. They are melting silver." Kaelin's eyes narrowed. "Lord William Trent is a coward, but the Archbishop is a fanatic. They will not meet us on the open field. They will try to bottleneck us at the gates." "What are your orders, my king?" asked Ewan, the pack leader from the eastern woods. Kaelin dismounted his boots, hitting the damp earth with a heavy thud. He looked at his lieutenants. "We do not breach the main gates. We take the catacombs. Reginald's holy fortress was built upon the ruins of an old mountain dwarven mine, the drainage grates that Beatrice used to escape her own prison. Highcross has them too, leading directly into the dungeons. The plan was a massive risk. The underground tunnels would be tight, forcing the Lycans to fight in close quarters where their superior numbers meant nothing. But a frontal assault against walls lined with archers firing silver-tipped arrows would be a massacre. The trap in the catacombs. Kaelin led a strike force of 50 elite warriors, including Garrick and Ewan, to the eastern edge of the fortress, where the moat fed into the ancient drainage system. Using their immense strength, they tore the iron grating from the stone. The air inside the tunnel was rancid, thick with the smell of stagnant water and decaying rats. They moved in absolute darkness, relying entirely on their night vision and hearing. For 20 minutes there was nothing but the dripping of water and the shallow breaths of his men. Then Calen stopped. His nostrils flared. Beneath the stench of the sewers he smelled it, the sharp metallic tang of raw silver mixed with the sweat of terrified men. "Ambush!" Calen roared the human word, morphing into a deafening guttural snarl. Before the echo of his voice faded, the tunnel was flooded with blinding, searing light. Iron torches coated in alchemical fire ignited along the walls, revealing heavily armored men, the silver vanguards blocking the tunnel ahead. At their helm stood Captain Leofric, a notoriously cruel inquisitor, known for his hatred of the Wolfkin. "Fire!" Leofric commanded. A volley of crossbow bolts, each tipped with lethal silver, tore through the narrow space. 2 Lycans beside Calen dropped, choking on their own blood, as the toxic metal burned through their veins, preventing their natural healing. The human part of Calen died in that moment. With a roar that shook the ancient stone foundations of High Cross, the Lycan King surrendered to the beast. His bones cracked and lengthened his muscles, tearing and rebuilding in seconds. Coarse midnight black fur erupted from his skin. His jaw elongated, filled with razor-sharp fangs. He did not become a 4-legged wolf. He became a towering 8-foot bipedal nightmare of muscle and rage. Calen launched himself forward. The silver bolts struck his thick hide, burning him, but his sheer momentum and fury overrode the agony. He crashed into the silver vanguards like a boulder dropped from the heavens. He swung a massive clawed hand, tearing through heavy iron breastplates as if they were made of wet parchment. Garrick and the others, inspired by their king's monstrous transformation, shifted and followed suit. The tunnel became a slaughterhouse. The silver vanguards, despite their holy weapons, were entirely unprepared for the claustrophobic, savage reality of facing fully shifted Lycans in a frenzy. Calen did not stop to relish the kill. He tore through the ranks, his golden eyes scanning the darkness for the stairs leading upward. He could feel her. The bond severed for 8 long years was pulsing in his chest like a beacon. Rosamond was close, and she was in pain. Calen smashed through the heavy oak door, leading from the catacombs into the lower dungeons of High Cross. The wood splintered into 1,000 pieces, echoing through the cavernous, torch-lit chamber. He was covered in the blood of his enemies, his chest heaving silver burns, smoking slightly on his dark fur. Slowly he forced his bones to snap back into their human configuration, though his eyes remained a glowing feral gold, and his claws remained extended. The dungeon was a horrific place, of chains, iron maidens, and blood-stained stone altars. At the far end of the room, standing behind a wall of 10 heavily armed inquisitors, was Archbishop Reginald, draped in immaculate white robes. Beside him stood a man Calen recognized instantly, despite the years. Lord William Trent. William was a tall, sharp-featured nobleman with a cruel twist to his mouth. He looked terrified, pale and sweating, but he tried to maintain an air of aristocratic superiority. And there, suspended by thick chains from the ceiling, was Rosamond. Calen's breath hitched. She was painfully thin, her beautiful silver-blonde hair matted and dull. Her dress was torn, revealing skin marred by recent beatings and old scars. Yet when she lifted her head, her silver-blue eyes, the exact replica of Beatrice's, blazed with unbroken defiance. "Calen." She breathed her voice, a fragile rasp that hit him harder than any silver blade. "Kill him. Archbishop Reginald shrieked, pointing a trembling, ring-adorned finger at Cailan. "Bring down the beast!" The 10 inquisitors charged, brandishing heavy silver broadswords. Cailan did not shift fully, but he moved with the speed of a striking viper. He dodged the first blade, grabbed the inquisitor by the throat, and hurled him with bone-shattering force into the stone wall. Garrick and Ewan poured into the room behind him, intercepting the remaining guards in a chaotic clash of steel and claws. Cailan walked straight through the carnage, his eyes locked entirely on William. William panicked. He drew a silver dagger from his belt and grabbed Rosamond by the hair, pressing the toxic blade against her throat. "Stop! Take one more step, monster, and I will carve her open. She is my wife by law." Cailan froze, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. "She was never yours." He snarled his voice, a horrifying mixture of human speech and a wolf's growl. "You took her. You tortured her. You intended to murder our daughter." "She is an abomination." William spat his hand, shaking so violently that the blade nicked Rosamond's skin. A drop of deep red blood trailed down her neck. "You both are. The Church will purge this land of your cursed bloodline." The ultimate betrayal. But William had made a fatal miscalculation. He believed Rosamond was entirely human. He believed 8 years of starvation and abuse had broken her. Rosamond looked Cailan directly in the eyes. She did not beg for help. Instead, she gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. Suddenly, Rosamond slammed her head backward with brutal force, catching William squarely in the nose. The nobleman shrieked, dropping the dagger as his nose shattered. Before he could recover, Rosamond brought her chained wrists upward, looping the heavy iron links over William's head and twisting her body, dragging him down to the floor with her. Cailan closed the distance in a fraction of a second. He gripped William by the front of his fine, silken tunic and hoisted him off the ground with one hand. The nobleman dangled, kicking and wheezing, his eyes bulging in absolute terror. "Please," William choked out, blood pouring over his lips. "Mercy. We are civilized men." "I am no man," Cailan whispered softly into William's ear. "I am the monster of the North, and you are trespassing on my territory." Cailan's claws extended, and with one swift, merciless motion, he silenced Lord William Trent forever. He dropped the lifeless body to the floor with a dull thud. Across the room, Garrick had cornered Archbishop Reginald, who was weeping and praying frantically in Latin. "Lock him in his own cells," Cailan ordered without looking back. "Let the Church see what happens to men who hunt children." Cailan dropped to his knees before Rosamond. With his bare hands, ignoring the searing pain as the silver-laced iron burned his palms, he gripped the chains binding her wrists and ripped them apart. She collapsed forward, and he caught her pulling her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the faint, lingering scent of lavender underneath the dungeon's rot. Tears, hot and entirely human, spilled from the Lycan King's eyes, soaking into her torn dress. "I thought I lost you." Cailan choked, his massive frame trembling as he held her tightly. "I thought you chose him." Rosamond lifted her weak hands, cupping his scarred face. "I would never choose anyone but you, my wild king. I had to protect Beatrice." "Is she—" "She is safe," Cailan swore, pressing his forehead against hers. "She came to me. She is exactly like you, brave, stubborn, magnificent." A weak, beautiful smile broke across Rosamond's bruised face. "Take me home, Cailan. Take me to our daughter." The return. The journey back to Wintergale Keep was a victorious procession. The silver vanguards were broken, their leadership dismantled. When Cailan carried Rosamond into the great hall of his fortress, wrapped securely in his fur cloak, just as their daughter had been days prior, the entire pack bowed their heads in absolute reverence. Beatrice came sprinting down the stone steps, her silver-blue eyes wide with tears. She threw herself at her parents, her small arms wrapping around Caelan's waist and her mother's legs. Caelan looked down at the two women who held his feral soul in the palms of their hands. The beast within him settled purring with a deep, territorial contentment. He was a warlord, a monster, a king. But as he knelt on the floor of his ancestral home and wrapped his massive arms around his family, Caelan Harlaw finally knew what it meant to be a father. Did you expect the fearsome Lycan King to be brought to his knees by a 7-year-old girl? The web of betrayal, spun by Lord Trent, is finally severed, and Caelan's wrath proved legendary. If you're hooked on this medieval werewolf romance and loved seeing the beast unleash his fury to reclaim his family, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your fellow fantasy lovers. What kind of unique powers do you think Beatrice will develop as the firstborn hybrid heir to the Lycan throne,